Cathy. I don't know whether you will be pleased or displeased, but no slides. I'm a member of the old school. I know how to write on a blackboard, but I don't do PowerPoint. I don't do it, but you have to listen. As Barry explained, as Professor Bluestone explained, I gather the main business of this course is the long run, is what are the sources of economic growth in a national economy or in a larger economy than that? Where does growth come from? And the policy implication, not implication, but the policy question here is how do you get an economy to grow rapidly and to have that growth widely shared in the population? But there's a problem. It's a problem that appeared in the slides that Professor Bluestone was showing you. It's a problem about getting there from here. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about right now. This is not going to be the usual junk about the financial crisis and all that. I have something else in mind. There is something very odd about our economic situation in the U.S. today. I read just recently an estimate from the Federal Reserve that about $7 trillion worth of wealth had been destroyed in the last year or year and a half. The country, so to speak, is $7 trillion poorer than it was. If I wasn't good conversation for Cathy in the car, I was trying to divide 7 trillion by 300 million. In my head, it comes to about $23,000 per man, woman, and child in the country. Of course, some have lost more and some have lost less. But what I want to point out to you is how strange that is. $7 trillion of wealth down the drain, but the productive capacity of the U.S. economy, the capacity of our economic system to produce goods and services for its people hasn't diminished at all. In fact, it's undoubtedly higher than it was a year or 18 months ago. The labor force is a couple of percent larger. The skills and education and training of the population have certainly not deteriorated and have probably gained. Net investment in capital has been positive. It's been declining, but has been positive. So we have a bigger stock of productive capital in the economy now than we did a year ago or 18 months ago. And so the productive capacity of this economy is bigger than it was, in spite of this $7 trillion disappearance of wealth. If you were thinking of buying the U.S. economy as a gift for your boyfriend or girlfriend, it would be worth just about as much as it was worth, like a used car. Worth just about as much or a little more than it was worth a year ago. So in that sense, we haven't lost anything at all. Of course, the point is we are in a recession. It's a year old according to pundits, and according to other pundits or the same pundits, it'll continue. The recession will continue for at least until the second half of this year and maybe beyond. And the point is that we're not using the productive capacity that we have. You saw the unemployment numbers that Professor Bluestone showed you. it's a lot harder to measure excess capacity in industry than it is to measure unemployment, but there are such figures, and they show an increase in unused capacity. So we have this machine for producing goods and services for its population, and we are not making full use of it. And that underuse of economic capacity, of productive capacity, will go on for a long time, even if the economy turns up sometime in the second half of this year. We will undoubtedly finish 2010 still with some slack in the economy, because the slack disappears only gradually. So if you're interested, now this is the point, this is why I started this way. If we're thinking about the long run growth of the economy, which means the long run growth of its capacity to produce, it's not a separate, but it's an analytically slightly different problem to make sure that the capacity is used. As long as we're not using all of the capacity, or nearly all of the capacity that we have, the economy and the decision makers in the economy are not likely to be motivated to do the things that increase potential output, that increase productive capacity very rapidly. So the short run order of business, policy business for us and for every other rich country that I know of, in Europe and Asia, for instance, right now, is to close that gap, narrow that gap between productive capacity and actual output, which means fundamentally trying to increase the demand for goods and services. And to do that in a way that at least doesn't create obstacles to the long run growth of the economy once the gap is closed, and maybe does some things that will help it. So imagine that it's now the January of 2011, and the American economy and the economies of the other rich countries, developed countries of the world, are prospering reasonably well, are using their capacity, have closed that gap. Then the question is, what makes them grow? What is it, what activities, economic activities that take place have the effect of increasing the capacity of the economy to produce useful goods and services? Now, you won't be surprised to, in fact, I'm staring at this monitor here, and it says, so what determines the rate of economic growth in an economy? And that's the question that I want to come to now. And it becomes relevant after you have done this short run task of closing that gap. There isn't any one word or two word answer to that question. And I should also make it explicit that I'm thinking now about what determines the rate of economic growth in a rich economy, in an advanced industrial economy. I'm not thinking about developing countries where the answers are related, but are somewhat different. And the truth is that for an advanced economy, the answers to that question sources of growth of potential output, of productive capacity, are really the usual suspects. They're things that we've known about now for quite a long time. And basically, what matters is what you might describe as investment in a very broad sense. And I have to emphasize the very broad sense. What increases the productive capacity of an economy like ours is investment in physical capital, in machinery and equipment and computers, and all the rest of that. Investment in what economists call human capital, meaning skills and capacities of workers, of people who work in the economy, and investment in new technology. And here, there is a slight difference between the US and even most of the countries of Europe. Not quite across the board, but in most branches of industry, the US is the technological leader. The gap was very big at the end of the Second World War and has closed considerably. But still, if you look at sector by sector, with some exceptions, the US is the technological leader. Other countries of the world, therefore, even fairly rich countries of the world, have the luxury of being able to acquire technology by imitation, essentially, by adopting, diffusing what's already known. This country is in the position of having, so to speak, to invent its own future. And I think Lynn will show you how New England has done some of those things. So basically, if we're looking now at the U.S., what's the things we have to look after in order to have a successful, fairly rapid rate of growth, we can talk about the equity issues later, are a high rate of savings and investment in plant and equipment. I'd rather have the saving done here than abroad, so that in effect the capital equipment that is built by investment in this country is owned in this country, and the returns to it stay. That's not necessary, but it's probably desirable. We need an extraordinary amount of emphasis, and we ought to talk more about this later, on investment in human capital, on producing a labor force that has the skills that are necessary to successfully operate that plant and equipment. And that's especially important because a country like this also has to invest in new technology. There's no place it can copy from. It has to, in most instances, create it itself. Now, when I say new technology, the phrase tends to have a sort of high-tech air about it, but I don't mean it that way. New technology needn't be high-tech. It turns out that in many ways, the most important contributors to productivity increase in the U.S. over the last decade or two have been the application of information technology to wholesale trade, retail trade, and financial services. In fact, there are studies trying to understand why the big European economies, Germany, France, the UK, Italy, have lagged behind the U.S. in productivity terms, general productivity terms. And the commonest answer seems to be that they have been slow to adapt information technology to the service sectors. Not in manufacturing, there is very little gap, if any, but the gap is in the service sectors. So this is extremely important. I want to emphasize it, even at the risk of some repetition. One of the standard, valid, almost universal generalizations about the way people behave economically is that technically the income elasticity of demand for services is high. As all over the world, as incomes rise, personal incomes rise, people want to spend, choose to spend a larger fraction of that income on services rather than goods. And you can understand why that should be so. So that most of the rapidly growing advanced economies grow more rapidly in the service-producing sectors than in the goods-producing sectors. There are exceptions to that. A country like Germany, to a lesser extent Japan, or formerly Japan, not so much anymore, but even today, Germany has a strong bias toward trying to make its living from essentially exporting high-quality manufactured goods. And you notice I said exporting, because the population of Germany, like the population of everywhere else, wants to consume services as it gets rich, not goods. So that those are the things, those are the essentially important things that a country like the U.S. needs to do to generate long-run growth of productive capacity. I should say, in terms of policy, that you should beware of any universal advice like, well, the market will take care of that. If the alternative to a market economy is some kind of central planning, then there's no question where the advantage lies. But there is absolutely no evidence in the historical record of the advanced economies that zero regulation or weak regulation of industry is somehow conducive to rapid growth, or that minimal involvement of the government in the economy is conducive to rapid growth. The functions of a government in terms of long-run growth are just what you would deduce from what I've already said, promoting research and development, providing incentives for investment when they are lacking, taking care of education, and looking after mobility. By the way, it is probably also true that a country there's less evidence for this generalization, but it's probably also true that business cycle instability is bad for economic growth. That countries that are given to wide fluctuations, like the ones you were looking at a few minutes ago, that's not a help for growth because it adds to uncertainty. The likelihood of broad fluctuations adds to uncertainty, and uncertainty is bad for all forward-looking activities, like investment, like mobility, like education, even. There was one other note I wanted to make before I stop this. I wanted to say a little more about that issue of mobility. When long-run growth is founded largely on technological there has got to be, when I say mobility, I don't necessarily mean geographical mobility. I mean industrial mobility and occupational mobility. In a rapidly growing, technologically based economy, people have to change the nature of their jobs frequently, and capital has to flow freely from obsolescent industries to new industries. It's very important when you come in this course to talk about issues of equity. I think it's very important to find ways so that the burdens that are associated with necessary mobility don't fall on workers and other people who are ill-equipped to bear them. Dislocation is probably some kinds of dislocation is probably an inevitable part of fast, mainly technologically based growth. But it's the task of economic policy to find ways of combining that with income security up and down, but where it's most needed is below the median for incomes. So why don't I stop there and turn this over to Lynn Browne, who is well equipped with